She was dragged into court for resisting arrest. But the real crime was daring to walk home while black. The cops laughed in her face, certain the system would crush her. Then, right in the middle of their testimony, she pulled out a piece of evidence they never saw coming. By the time the room went silent, even the judge looked afraid, and no one knew who she really was. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper, sweat, and overconfidence. The kind of overconfidence worn like a badge by men who believed the room belonged to them. On the right, 3 uniformed officers lounged behind the prosecution's table. They sat like they were at a poker game, slouched, whispering, their laughter occasionally breaking into a sharp chuckle that echoed in the wooden chamber. Every now and then, one would nudge the other with his elbow, nodding in her direction. She stood at the defense table, alone. No lawyer by her side, no friend, no family, just her and a stack of neatly arranged papers she hadn't touched since entering the room. Her navy skirt had seen better days. A single loose thread swayed every time she shifted her weight. Her jacket, a muted gray, was buttoned all the way up, almost as if she were trying to shield herself from the cold draft sneaking in from the back hallway. But her eyes didn't belong to someone being cornered. They were still, measured, like she'd been here before and knew how this play would end. The bailiff called for order, but the order was an illusion. The mockery continued, subtle enough not to be called contempt, brazen enough for her to hear. "You think she even knows what's going on?" One of the officers muttered, his voice just above a whisper. "Doesn't matter," the other replied. "She's already lost. She just doesn't know it yet." The third officer leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting. "This'll be over before lunch. Watch." The judge entered, a tall, stern man in his late 60s, whose silver hair caught the sunlight streaming from the upper windows. He glanced at the docket, barely pausing over her name before speaking. "Ms. Jordan," he began, his tone heavy with the kind of patience reserved for the hopelessly outmatched. "This is your chance to respond to the charges against you. You may proceed." She didn't move. Not yet. Instead, she let her gaze drift, first to the officers, then to the court reporter, then to the small gallery in the back. There were only 5 people watching. One was an older woman clutching a folded newspaper. Another, a young man scrolling his phone without interest. The rest were empty benches. The emptiness made the laughter louder. She finally stepped forward, each footstep echoing like a deliberate drumbeat. Her hands rested lightly on the table. Fingers relaxed. Not shaking. Not clenched. "Your Honor," she began, her voice low but carrying. "Before I respond, I'd like to request clarification." The judge tilted his head. "Clarification?" "Yes," she said. "Clarification on why, in a case alleging misconduct and abuse of authority, the very officers named in my complaint are permitted to sit here." And she paused, glancing toward them. "Conduct themselves like this is a comedy show." That broke the whisper barrier. The lead officer gave a short laugh. A laugh meant for her. "Oh, she's got jokes," he muttered. The judge frowned but didn't reprimand him. That silence said more than any ruling could. Her words were measured, but underneath them was a current of something sharper. Not anger exactly, but something colder, more precise. The gallery shifted uncomfortably. The older woman leaned forward, as if sensing the undercurrent. She continued, "The record should reflect that the prosecution's witnesses are actively mocking me during proceedings. That's relevant. Because this," she motioned toward them without turning her head, "is not just about an incident on a street corner. It's about the way they view people like me before they even step into uniform." One of the officers grinned wide, showing perfect teeth. "People like you? Lady, you're the one on trial." The judge rapped his gavel. Enough. But it wasn't enough. The energy in the room had already tilted, and it wasn't in her favor. She didn't flinch, didn't look at them. Instead, she adjusted her papers, as though their words had been background noise. The prosecution began its opening argument, a methodical recital of events designed to paint her as erratic, non-compliant and dangerous in her refusal to obey lawful orders. The language was cold, clinical, and to anyone listening closely, deeply coded. They didn't have to say black woman. They said uncooperative. They didn't have to say angry. They said agitated. They didn't have to say threatening. They said escalating the encounter. Each word, a calculated translation for the same stereotype that had shadowed her entire life. When they finished, the judge turned back to her. "Your response, Miss Jordan," She stepped forward again, slower this time. The air in the room seemed heavier. I have no response to their version of events, she said, voice even. Because their version of events does not exist outside of their own fabrication. The lead officer laughed again, louder now, unbothered by decorum. And here we go, fantasy hour. The second officer smirked. Hope you brought a tissue, sweetheart. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze for the first time. Her face gave nothing away, but her eyes, they stayed on him a fraction too long. Enough to make him shift in his seat, if only slightly. Then she looked back at the judge. I'm ready to present my evidence, she said simply. The officers exchanged glances. One mouthed, what evidence? To the other. She reached for the top sheet of her papers, but didn't lift it. Instead, she let her hands rest there, fingertips pressing lightly against the edges. A silence stretched. A silence she controlled. The bailiff shifted his stance. The court reporter looked up briefly, sensing something coming. Even the gallery seemed to hold its breath. Her voice was calm when she spoke again. Almost too calm. What they didn't know, she said, her eyes sweeping the room, landing on the officer's last, was who I really was. The way the courtroom's fluorescent lights hummed above her head had a rhythm, like an unwanted memory trying to force itself forward. It was in that same sound, the low electrical buzz, that she first heard the cruiser that night. It was late, the kind of late, when the city's noise has settled, but the streetlights still bathed the sidewalk in their orange glow. Jordan had just left her second job, the one she didn't tell people about because it didn't fit the version of herself she wanted. Remembered, she walked with a paper grocery bag tucked into her elbow, the plastic handles of another cutting into her fingers. Inside, milk, bread, some instant noodles and a single box of herbal tea she'd been meaning to try. Her apartment was only 4 blocks away. 4 blocks that should have been nothing more than pavement and quiet. She noticed the headlights before she heard the engine, bright, deliberate, slowing as they came up behind her. The sound of the tires wasn't casual. It was calculated. A predator's pace. The cruiser passed, then slowed. Then it circled the block. By the third pass, her heart had learned the beat, not racing, but bracing. She'd lived enough years to recognize when she was being sized up. And by whom? It rolled up beside her, the passenger window gliding down. The beam from the spotlight hit her square in the chest, bleaching the color out of her jacket. Evening, ma'am, came the voice. A casual drawl, with the bite of authority underneath. Where you headed? She kept walking, but slowed enough to answer. Home. Just got off work. That's so. The driver leaned over, his elbow resting on the door. Mind telling us where home is? The question wasn't about home. She knew that. It was about permission. Permission to be walking here. Permission to exist in a neighborhood they decided she didn't belong in. Her tone stayed even. A few blocks up, the second voice, deeper, slower, came from the passenger seat. We had a call about someone matching your description. There it was. Matching your description. 3 words that had been used to stop more black people in this city than any crime report ever printed. She stopped walking then. Not because she wanted to, but because her mind ran through the list of right things to do. Stop. Be visible. Hands free. Voice calm. Every survival lesson that had been carved into her by her mother's warnings. The one on the passenger side opened his door and stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smirk that said he was already writing the report in his head. His badge caught the streetlight. She noticed his name, Officer D. Harland, before she noticed anything else about him. Mind if I see some ID? He asked, not as a request. She shifted the groceries in her hands. Can I put these down first? Sure thing. His tone was polite enough to be insulting. The milk jug wobbled as she lowered the bag to the ground. She reached slowly into her jacket for her wallet. Harlan's eyes followed every movement, not with caution but with that subtle expectation that she might suddenly become dangerous. She handed him her license. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds before handing it back. Where are you coming from? Work. Where at? A warehouse downtown. You work nights there? Yes. He stepped closer. Funny. We got a report about a woman carrying stolen goods from a store down on 5th. Her brow furrowed. Groceries? Could be. She felt her stomach tighten. The other officer, still in the driver's seat, spoke up. Let's go ahead and run her name. That was the moment she knew it wouldn't matter what she said. It wouldn't matter that she'd done nothing wrong. The decision had already been made. Harlan took her arm. Not roughly, not kindly. just firmly enough to make it clear she wasn't going anywhere, until they said so.
Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to turn around.
The words hit like a cold slap. Am I being detained? She asked. You're being checked out. It was the euphemism that made it worse. As if they were giving her a courtesy, as if she was the inconvenience. She felt the metal close around her wrists before the meaning fully landed. The cuffs were cold, heavier than they looked. The click of them locking into place seemed to echo down the block. A car slowed as it passed. Curtains shifted in a window across the street. Someone, maybe more than one person, was watching. The cruiser's red and blue lights flared on, painting the brick walls and pavement in a strobe of accusation. In that flicker, she saw her reflection in the grocery store window she'd just passed. Hands cuffed, head lowered, groceries at her feet. The humiliation wasn't in the cuffs alone. It was in the way Harlan's smirk widened, in the way the driver leaned an arm casually out the window like this was routine. Like she was routine. She asked again quietly this time, "What's this for?" Harlan shrugged. "Just making sure you check out." He walked her to the back of the cruiser. The milk in her bag tilted and leaked slowly onto the sidewalk. She wanted to tell him to pick it up. She didn't. He opened the back door and guided her in. The vinyl seat was cold. The smell of stale coffee and sweat clung to the air. Through the window she saw her groceries still on the ground. The bread bag had torn open. The driver adjusted the radio. Harlan leaned against the car, speaking into his shoulder mic. "Yeah, got her here now. Gonna bring her in." And then it happened. From somewhere in the shadows at the far end of the block. Not the click of a door latch. Not the click of a lock. The sharp, unmistakable click of a camera. Harlan froze for half a second before scanning the street. The sound came again, this time faster, in quick succession. Somebody was recording. The second click was louder. Not because the sound itself had changed, but because of the way it pierced the moment, like a needle through a balloon of authority. From the corner of her eye, Jordan caught a faint glint, the small reflective circle of a camera lens. Whoever was holding it was smart enough to stay just beyond the wash of the cruiser's lights, tucked behind a cluster of hedges that bordered the sidewalk. Harlan's head snapped toward the sound. "Hey!" His voice wasn't the casual mocking tone from moments before. It was sharp, defensive. The camera didn't stop. Another click, 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 each one as precise as a heartbeat. "Leave it," the driver muttered from the cruiser. "Let's just get her in." But Harlan didn't leave it. He took a step forward, his boots crunching against the grit on the pavement. "I said hey." The shadow behind the hedges moved, but not away. Closer. For a fraction of a second, the face of the photographer slipped into the glow of a street lamp.
A teenager.
16, maybe 17. Jordan recognized him. He lived 3 doors down from her. The kid who skateboarded past her building every afternoon with his headphones around his neck. Now those headphones hung loose, swinging slightly as he held the phone steady. Recording. Jordan's chest tightened, not from fear for herself, but for him. She knew what happened to people who documented the wrong moments. The driver got out now, muttering under his breath. His posture wasn't aggressive. It was calculated. They were going to make this go away before it ever left the street. The teen's voice was shaky, but audible. "I saw you stop her for no reason. I saw you grab her." Harlan's smirk returned, but it was different now. Thinner, stretched tight. "Put the phone down, kid. This isn't your business." "It is if you're lying." The teen shot back. That was the first time Jordan felt a flicker of something unfamiliar in Harlan's eyes. Not respect. Not fear. Recognition. The driver moved first, stepping forward, palm out, pretending to calm things down. Hey, no need to get worked up. Let's just talk, all right? I just want to see what you've got there." The kid didn't lower the phone. "You can see it on the news tomorrow." Harlan laughed once. A short, humorless sound. Wrong answer. Before the kid could react, Harlan closed the distance in 3 long strides. Jordan twisted in her seat, the cuffs biting into her wrists. "Don't!" she shouted. But Harlan was already in front of the boy. His voice dropped low enough that Jordan couldn't hear every word. But the tone was unmistakable, the mix of intimidation and threat honed by years of knowing the badge could protect him. The phone was gone from the kid's hand within seconds. Not snatched, taken. Jordan knew that move. The polite confiscation that came with an implied "if you don't hand it over, will make this a lot worse." The teen stood frozen, staring at his empty palm like it was a wound. Harlan slipped the phone into his jacket pocket, clapping the boy on the shoulder in a mock-friendly gesture. Run on home, now. School night. The boy didn't move. He looked at Jordan, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the shadows. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Every instinct told her that phone and the truth it held would disappear before sunrise. It did. By the next morning, the boy was quieter than she'd ever seen him. When she passed him on her way to the corner store, he wouldn't meet her eyes. His skateboard was gone. His headphones were gone. "Hey," she said softly, stopping in front of him. "About last night." "I don't have it," he interrupted, voice flat. "Your phone?" "It's broken." She could see it in the way his jaw tightened. Broken wasn't the truth. Broken was the excuse. He shifted on his feet, glancing down the block like he expected someone to be watching. Then he stepped closer and whispered, "They came to my house." Her stomach sank. "When?" "This morning." "Said they wanted to clear something up. I don't know what they did, but my mom told me to drop it." She said, "They know where I go after school." Jordan closed her eyes briefly. The humiliation of the arrest had been sharp. But this was something heavier. It wasn't just about her anymore. The system didn't just erase evidence. It taught people not to make any in the first place. Still, what Harlan didn't know, what no one in that patrol car knew, was that the boy hadn't been the only one recording. Her building had an old security camera tucked into the corner of the entrance, half broken, the kind of thing people ignored because they assumed it didn't work. She'd ignored it herself for months. But that night, it caught the entire scene from 50 feet away. The grainy footage wasn't cinematic, but it was clear enough to show the handcuffs, the untouched groceries, the moment Harlan took the phone from the boy's hand. Jordan had downloaded the footage before the property manager could even check the system. She'd watched it twice, then 3 times. Each time the weight in her chest grew heavier, not from the memory but from the decision she knew she'd have to make. Because the footage wasn't just proof. It was leverage, and leverage had to be timed. The courtroom buzzed faintly in her ears now, as the memory faded, replaced by the present. The judge was speaking, but his voice blurred into the background. Her fingertips rested on the stack of papers in front of her. Inside, printed in black and white, was every frame of that footage. Each still image a nail in the coffin of their case against her. She could feel Harlan's eyes on her from across the room. Still smug, still certain she was cornered. The narrator's voice cut in like the whisper of a blade, but she had her own copy. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead again, but this time, the sound didn't drag her into the memory. It grounded her in the present. Jordan sat at the defense table, hands folded neatly, eyes fixed on the judge. Across the room, Harlan lounged in his chair like he was back in that cruiser, his legs spread, arms draped over the backrest. The 2 other officers mirrored him, their posture the posture of men who believed the day was already won. The prosecutor droned on, presenting the facts in a voice that was equal parts rehearsed and patronizing. Each word landed with the smug confidence of someone reading from a script they thought no one would dare challenge. Jordan listened, not because she needed to. She already knew every lie they would tell, but because she understood something the officers didn't. Letting them speak was part of the setup. "Miss Jordan," the prosecutor said suddenly, looking at her over the edge of his file, "you claim this arrest was without cause. Yet you refused to comply with repeated instructions from Officer Harlan. Why?" She leaned forward slightly. "I asked why I was being detained. That is not refusal to comply." He gave a thin smile. "But you did not stop walking when first instructed, correct?" She met his gaze. "I was walking home with groceries. It was dark. I was alone. I kept walking until I understood what I was being stopped for." Harlan chuckled, a low derisive sound that carried across the courtroom. "She's got an answer for everything, doesn't she?" he muttered, loud enough for the gallery to hear. The second officer grinned. "It's all in the delivery, man. She talks like she's rehearsed this." The gallery gave a small ripple of laughter. Jordan didn't turn toward them. She didn't need to. Their casual racism wasn't in the words alone. It was in the way they made them sound like jokes. As if mocking her speech, her tone, her composure was just harmless banter. She spoke slowly. "You think this is entertainment?" The second officer leaned forward, smiling. "Lady, the whole thing's a show." The judge cleared his throat, but it wasn't the kind of reprimand that carried weight. Jordan had expected that. The authority in the room wasn't neutral. It leaned, subtly but unmistakably, toward the badge. Still, she kept her voice measured, calm. It wasn't submission. It was precision. When she asked the court reporter to read back part of Harlan's earlier testimony, she intentionally stumbled over the term procedural compliance, letting the faintest hesitation slip into her tone. The smirk that passed between Harlan and the second officer was exactly what she wanted. They thought they were watching her fumble. They thought they were watching her drown. She wasn't drowning. She was baiting. As the prosecution rested, she rose from her seat, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. She didn't move quickly. Every motion was deliberate, the kind of slowness that made people lean forward without realizing it. She stepped toward the center of the courtroom, close enough to see the fine creases in Harlan's uniform, the polished shine of his badge. "Your Honor," she began, "before I answer any more questions, I'd like to make a request." The judge tilted his head. "And what is that?" She let the silence breathe for a moment. "Permission to submit a piece of evidence into the record." The prosecutor frowned. "Evidence not previously disclosed is not." She raised her hand slightly, cutting him off without looking at him. "This is not new evidence. It's been in my possession since the night of the arrest. I've simply been waiting for the appropriate time to introduce it." Harlan shifted in his seat. It was slight, just a change in posture, but she saw it, the first hairline crack in his composure. The judge adjusted his glasses. "What evidence?" Jordan reached down to the folder at the corner of her table. Her fingers brushed over the pages, not yet opening it, just letting the anticipation stretch like a taut wire. The officers were watching her now. Their smirks faded into something closer to curiosity. She straightened, eyes sweeping the room. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the same calm weight it had when she'd faced them on the street. "Before I answer," she said, pausing just long enough for every ear in the room to catch the shift in her tone, "I'd like to submit this evidence." The gallery went still. She didn't open the folder. Not yet, because the power wasn't in the paper. It was in the moment right before it landed, and she intended to make them feel every second of it. The judge called a brief recess, the gavel's sharp crack slicing through the electric stillness. The gallery erupted into low murmurs as benches scraped and the courtroom doors opened. Jordan stayed seated for a moment, letting the wave of movement pass her. She could feel their eyes, Harlan's most of all, burning into her back. But she didn't turn around. Instead, she reached down, slid the folder back into her bag, and rose without hurry. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked out into the corridor. The courthouse hallway was colder than the courtroom, its pale tile walls reflecting the harsh glow of the overhead lights. The smell of burnt coffee drifted from a vending machine near the elevators. She didn't go far, just far enough to stand by a column near the end of the hall. From there, she could hear them before she saw them. Harlan's voice was unmistakable, even when he tried to keep it low. "She's just another loudmouth who doesn't know her place." The second officer gave a short laugh. "Yeah, thinking she's got some kind of bombshell in that folder. What's she gonna do? Read us a Wikipedia article?" A third voice, the younger one, the rookie she'd barely noticed in the courtroom, muttered something she couldn't quite catch. Harlan answered him with a scoff. "Doesn't matter what she says. We've got the department on our side. Judge won't touch us." Jordan leaned against the column, her expression neutral. She'd heard worse. The venom wasn't in the words themselves. It was in the confidence behind them. Confidence built over years of seeing the system bend in their favor. But she wasn't here to correct their assumptions. She wanted them to believe them. She wanted them relaxed. Because people who thought they were untouchable didn't guard themselves. They left cracks. The rookie spoke again, a little louder this time. "Still, did you see the way she looked at you, Harlan? Like she knew something." Harlan snorted. "She doesn't know a damn thing. Just some community college grad thinking she can play lawyer." Jordan's lips curved almost imperceptibly. That was the thing about assumptions. They were only as accurate as the information you had. She thought briefly of the framed degrees in her apartment, not the one from her Ivy League law program, but the one she kept in the back of a closet, the certificate from the Federal Criminal Investigative Training Program, and the ID badge locked in her desk drawer that she hadn't used in years. They didn't know. Not yet. She shifted her weight, pulling her phone from her pocket, pretending to scroll through messages. In truth, she was listening, mapping the cadence of their arrogance. The second officer leaned closer to Harlan. "You think she'll actually try to get this on record?" "Let her," Harlan replied. "We'll have it buried before the ink's dry. We've done it before." Jordan's thumb stilled on the screen. They'd done it before. She'd suspected as much. Suspected her arrest was part of a larger pattern. But hearing it confirmed was another matter entirely. She didn't react outwardly, but inside she filed it away. Patterns were how you built cases. A door slammed at the far end of the hall, breaking the moment. The officers moved off toward the vending machine, their conversation dissolving into low mutters. Jordan turned her attention back to her phone, ready to finally check her messages. That's when it happened. The vibration was sharp, insistent. A new message. It wasn't from anyone in her contacts. No name, just a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. They don't know who you are yet. She froze, not because she felt threatened, but because of the precision of the wording. Whoever sent it knew her, not just her name. The hallway around her seemed to narrow. The hum of fluorescent lights, the distant echo of footsteps, the clatter of the vending machine. All of it faded under the weight of those words. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, ready to type back. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she slipped the phone into her pocket and straightened, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. If the officers thought she was dangerous before, they hadn't seen anything yet. The text still glowed on her phone screen as she made her way back into the courtroom. They don't know who you are yet. Jordan had read it twice, not for clarity, but for the quiet satisfaction it stirred. Whoever sent it was right. Harland and his friends didn't have a clue. Not about her education, not about her career, and certainly not about the badge that had once opened doors even they couldn't approach. Years ago, before the late shifts in the worn-out jacket, before the empty apartment with its stack of unopened mail, she'd worn a very different kind of uniform. Not a blue one, with a stitched nameplate, but a black suit with a discreet lapel pin. The FBI's training academy in Quantico was where she learned how to read people, how to map their movements without ever being seen, and how to listen to the words they didn't say. It was also where she learned that the deeper you went into the system, the more corruption you found hiding in plain sight. Her clearance level had been higher than most agents her age, a rare promotion earned after a string of undercover cases in which she'd infiltrated, not street gangs, but entire networks of white-collar crime tied to law enforcement budgets and procurement contracts. She'd played the role of the overlooked clerk, the mild-mannered analyst, even the rookie detective on loan. And each time, the people she was investigating underestimate her. Just like Harland was underestimating her now. The mission she'd set for herself was born in those years, not just to solve cases, but to dismantle patterns. She understood that racism in policing wasn't just an individual flaw. It was a network, a machinery, and it was always protected by someone higher up. When she left the bureau officially, her resignation letter didn't mention the real reason, that she could do more damage to that machinery from the outside. She became harder to track. Her assignments became unofficial, sometimes anonymous. A favor here, a data leak there, all pointing in the same direction, toward exposing the system's rot without letting the rot see her coming. This trial wasn't an accident. It was bait. Harland had picked the wrong woman to profile on the street that night. But the truth was, she'd been looking for someone like him. Someone careless enough to embody the arrogance of the badge in public. Someone shielded enough to believe nothing could touch him. She'd already mapped his career. The questionable stops, the internal complaints that vanished, the way his supervisors covered for him. This wasn't just about her arrest. It was about cracking open the pattern he represented. And the footage? That wasn't just proof of misconduct. It was a matchstick. The folder in her bag held not just still frames from the security camera, but cross-referenced reports, timestamps from unrelated incidents, and the names of other civilians who'd been targeted by the same officers. She hadn't shown anyone the whole file yet, not even the court. The courtroom was just the stage. The real audience was outside. Reporters, civil rights attorneys, federal contacts who'd been waiting for the right case to push forward. When she stepped back inside, Harland was already in his seat. His smirk had returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was watching her too closely now. The bailiff closed the doors, sealing the room in a hush. Jordan slid into her chair, resting her hands on the folder without opening it. From the outside she looked calm, maybe even tired. Inside, her mind moved in sharp, deliberate lines. She was counting down. Across the aisle, the prosecutor shuffled his papers. The judge adjusted his glasses. The sound of the clock on the far wall seemed louder than before. And then the bailiff, the same one who had barely looked at her during the morning session, stepped forward, leaning slightly toward her.
"Ma'am," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear.
She glanced up, meeting his eyes. There was no hostility there, no condescension, just the faintest flicker of recognition. It's time. Her lips curved into a smile. Not wide, not theatrical, but the kind of smile that says the next move is already set, the kind that makes the other player in the game realize they've been several steps behind all along. She closed the folder, slid it under her arm, and rose. Whatever Harland thought this trial was, it was about to become something entirely different. The courtroom doors opened mid-sentence. The prosecutor had been pacing before the jury box, rehearsed indignation dripping from every line. His voice faltered, just for a fraction of a second, as the three men in dark suits stepped inside. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. The way they moved, unhurried, precise, drew every eye in the room. Their badges were visible, but not brandished. The gold gleam at their belts was enough for anyone who knew authority to recognize it instantly. Harland's smirk died first. He leaned slightly toward Mendez, voice low. "What the hell is this?" Mendez shrugged, but his eyes stayed locked on the agents. Boyd glanced toward the back exit, as if he was already weighing the impossible, just getting up and leaving. The judge straightened in his seat. This court was not notified of any. The lead agent stepped forward, producing a folded document from his jacket. "Your Honor, we're here at the request of the defense. We're not here to disrupt proceedings, only to ensure the integrity of the evidence being presented." The choice of words, integrity of the evidence, landed like a stone dropped in still water. The prosecutor was already on his feet. "This is highly irregular." The agent didn't look at him. His gaze moved past the bench, past the jury, and landed squarely on Jordan. She was seated at the defense table, hands folded neatly over the folder that had been the silent center of the day's tension. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look confused. She looked like she'd been waiting for them. The gallery had gone utterly still. A woman in the second row leaned forward, her purse clutched in both hands. A man in the back, who had been scribbling in a notebook, stopped mid-sentence. Even the court reporter's hands froze just for a second before continuing their rapid clack. The agents walked in a line down the center aisle. Each step felt deliberate, measured, as if they were crossing some invisible threshold in the room. Harland muttered again, this time under his breath. "They're here for her. Gotta be. Finally gonna haul her out." Mendez nodded faintly, as if reassuring himself. Boyd smirked in relief, thinking the whole mess was about to be cleaned up in their favor. What none of them noticed, what only Jordan seemed to, was the way the agent's eyes never left her. Not in a hostile way, but with an unspoken acknowledgement. The lead agent stopped at the defense table, resting one hand lightly on the polished wood. "Ms. Jordan," he said, his voice carrying in the hush. "Are we ready?" It was subtle, but the phrasing alone made Harland's head turn sharply toward him. Jordan rose from her chair, every movement deliberate. The folder remained under her hand. She didn't rush. The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but the judge raised a hand, not to silence Jordan, but to stop him. The agent stepped to either side of her, flanking her in a way that was protective, not restraining. The entire dynamic in the room shifted, the air heavier now. The lines between defense and prosecution suddenly blurred. In the corner of her vision, Jordan saw Harland's expression change, from smugness to something smaller. Confusion, yes, but also recognition, though he didn't know why. She looked at him directly for the first time all day. Not a glare, not even defiance, just the kind of level, unwavering gaze that makes a person feel like they're being read line by line. Then she turned back to the lead agent. Her voice was calm, but it carried. "Gentlemen," she said, the faintest edge of a smile in her tone. "Let's proceed." For the first 30 seconds after the agents walked in, no one moved. The sight of three men in tailored suits, badges gleaming discreetly on their belts, seemed to press the air out of the room. The judge leaned forward slightly, brows knitting. "And who exactly?" The lead agent lifted a hand, calm but firm. "Your Honor, we're here in support of the defense. With your permission, we'd like to enter supplemental evidence into the record." The prosecutor was on his feet before the judge could answer. "This is highly irregular." The agent didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed on Jordan. She gave the faintest nod. The signal. Jordan stepped forward, the folder under her arm no longer looking like a prop. She set it on the defense table, unfastened the clasp, and began laying out documents one by one, each sheet sliding across the polished wood with the quiet weight of inevitability. The first page was a copy of the arrest report Harland had filed the night he cuffed her. The second was the same report, obtained through an anonymous leak from the department's own servers. The differences were underlined in red. One version claimed she had resisted, the other contained no such note. The third document was a citizen complaint form, filed by a man 3 years earlier, describing an almost identical stop, right down to the phrases matching your description, and non-compliant. That complaint had been marked resolved with no action. The judge leaned closer, flipping pages. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but in the subtle way people do when they realize the foundation under them might not be solid after all. Your Honor, Jordan said evenly, what you're seeing is not just inconsistency, it's fabrication. It's a deliberate pattern of false reporting meant to justify stops that would otherwise be unconstitutional. She picked up another page, a chart this time, and placed it in front of him. This is a compiled list of every stop conducted by Officers Harland Mendez and Boyd over the last 18 months. 72% of the individuals stopped were black, despite black residents making up less than 30% of this district's population. Many of these stops were not logged in the official system. Harland shifted in his seat. His smirk was gone now, replaced by a tightened jaw. Mendez glanced sideways at him, a flicker of unease breaking through his still posture. Jordan's voice remained steady, but the edge in it was unmistakable. Your Honor, I am not on trial here, because I broke the law. I am on trial because I challenged the authority of men who have used their badges to target, harass, and intimidate citizens who look like me. The gallery was silent now. Even the court reporter had slowed, glancing up between keystrokes. The lead agent stepped forward, handing the judge a sealed envelope. In addition, he said, we have obtained internal correspondence between these officers and certain members of the district attorney's office, suggesting coordinated efforts to alter or suppress evidence in multiple cases. The contents are highly sensitive, but they corroborate the defense's claims. The judge's eyes narrowed. This is substantial. The prosecutor tried again. Your Honor, this is an ambush. None of this has been. Sit down, the judge said sharply, not looking at him. Jordan allowed herself a small breath. This was the turn she had been waiting for. The moment the room's gravitational pull shifted away from her, and toward the men who had walked in here, certain they could crush her. She reached for the last item in the folder, a grainy still image printed in black and white. It showed Harland leaning into the teenage neighbor, his hand closing over the boy's phone. The timestamp in the corner matched the exact minute of her arrest. This, she said, is why the video of my arrest never made it to the public. And this is why I've been accused of resisting arrest. Because the truth, if unaltered, would have made it impossible to justify the charges you see against me today. The silence that followed wasn't the usual courtroom quiet. It was the silence of something cracking, of a structure beginning to tilt. Mendez leaned toward Harland, whispering something urgent. Boyd's hand twitched against his knee. From where she stood, Jordan saw it happen, the moment when the confidence drained from Harland's face, replaced by the first real glint of panic. He leaned back, his lips barely moving as he muttered to Mendez, "We're screwed." By the time the court recessed that afternoon, the story had already begun spilling beyond the courthouse walls. It started with a single local reporter, the kind who haunted arraignments, looking for a headline, catching wind of the FBI's sudden presence in a small municipal case. Then came the first blog post, then the call. By nightfall, every major outlet in the city had a truck parked on Main Street, their satellite dishes angled toward the courthouse like silver eyes. The air outside hummed with generator noise, and the low murmur of reporters rehearsing live shots. Inside City Hall, the tension was thicker than cigarette smoke. The mayor's chief of staff sat at the head of the long oak table, sleeves rolled up, phone buzzing constantly beside him. "This can't keep building," he said, voice low but urgent. "If the public thinks half of what's in that courtroom is true, we've got a crisis on our hands." Across from him, the city's police commissioner leaned forward, his jaw tight. "She's lying," he said. "She's spinning a narrative. We've dealt with this before." The chief of staff didn't blink. "She's not just spinning a narrative. She's got the bureau sitting in the gallery. That's not spin, that's a warning shot." The mayor was silent, leaning back in his chair, watching the conversation like someone listening to distant thunder. Finally, he spoke. "How much of what she's got is containable?" The room went still. The commissioner glanced toward the city attorney, who had been flipping through a thin folder with more interest than urgency. "It depends on what she's holding back," the attorney said finally. "If those agents are feeding her, this isn't a local matter anymore. Once it jumps federal, the city loses control." That night, calls went out. Some whispered through secure lines, others shouted into phones in frustration. Judges were contacted, allies were reminded of favors owed. One council member even suggested pulling the plug on court coverage, but it was too late. The public wanted a show, and now they had one. Back at the courthouse, Jordan's apartment light stayed off long after she returned. She stood by the window, looking down at the trucks lining the curb. She could see reporters rehearsing their sign-offs, cameramen adjusting their frames to catch the courthouse steps. She knew what was coming. The political machine never let something like this move forward without trying to twist it back in its favor. The next morning, the shift was visible before the hearing even resumed. The prosecutor had traded his weary posture for something tighter, more controlled. The judge, too, seemed unusually alert, his eyes flicking toward the gallery with a subtle tension. Jordan noticed the suited man seated in the back row. Not media, not FBI, not anyone she recognized from the previous days. His eyes didn't follow the case. They followed her. Just after the mid-morning break, the courtroom doors opened again. This time, it wasn't the FBI. It was a man in a dark navy suit, carrying a thick, sealed envelope. The city's crest was stamped in gold across the front. His stride was confident, almost rehearsed, and he didn't glance at anyone as he approached the bench. The judge looked up, clearly expecting him. The man set the envelope down in front of him. In bold block letters, the words were unmistakable. For the judge's eyes only. The judge's expression didn't change, but Jordan saw it. The faint tightening around his mouth, the way his thumb traced the edge of the envelope before pulling it closer. Whatever was inside wasn't meant for the public, and it wasn't meant for her. The gallery was silent again, all eyes darting between the envelope and the judge's unreadable face. Jordan's hand rested lightly on her folder, but she didn't move to open it. She didn't need to, because whatever was inside that envelope, she already had a feeling she knew. The judge didn't open it right away. For a long, suspended moment, he just stared at the envelope, the gold-embossed city crest gleaming under the courtroom's flat white lights. His thumb traced the edge in slow circles, as though the seal itself carried some invisible weight. From her seat, Jordan could see the hesitation in his movements. This wasn't the delay of a man distracted. It was the stall of someone who knew, with a quiet certainty, that whatever lay inside could not be unseen, unheard, or unremembered. The city attorney, still standing near the bench, clasped his hands behind his back in a posture that looked formal but felt smug. His expression seemed to say, "You'll know what to do once you read it." Finally, with a sound that cut through the air like a thread snapping, the judge broke the seal. The tear of the thick paper seemed far too loud for the stillness of the room. He pulled out a neatly stacked set of typed pages, flipping through them at a brisk pace at first, a cursory skim, before something on page 3 made his movement slow. His eyes locked on a paragraph, scanning it twice. His jaw shifted, tightening ever so slightly. Jordan caught the shift in his breathing. Shallower, heavier, his chin lifted just a fraction, as if bracing himself against the weight of what he was absorbing. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Your Honor may..." No. The word was sharp, final, and landed in the room like a gavel, all its own. The judge didn't even look up. He turned another page. This time the silence was different, denser. Harlan's knee bounced rapidly under the table. Mendez's eyes kept flicking from the envelope to Jordan, like a man watching a fuse burn toward an unknown charge. Boyd sat rigid, jaw muscles twitching as though he were chewing invisible words he couldn't spit out. Jordan sat completely still. Not a blink. Not a twitch. She already had a good guess about what those pages held. And she also knew something no one else in this room understood yet. It wasn't the city's narrative that had landed on the judge's desk. When the judge finally lowered the papers, the air felt tighter, as if the walls had inched closer. He cleared his throat. This court has just received a set of documents, provided it appears by a whistleblower within the municipal structure. The gallery stirred not a rustle, but a ripple. The kind of collective reaction that rolls through a room when people realize they're watching a story turn into history. The judge's voice stayed level, but the edges were taut. These documents allege, and in many cases demonstrate, systemic corruption within the city's police department. Included are accounts of falsified reports, deliberate destruction of exculpatory evidence, and repeated targeting of black citizens for unlawful stops and detentions. Harlan's knuckles went bone white against the polished defense table. Mendez's composure slipped, his mouth falling open before he quickly shut it. Boyd muttered something under his breath, too quiet for the record, but sharp enough to be noticed. The judge turned another page, and the timbre of his voice shifted, darker now. These documents also name individuals directly involved in these actions, extending beyond this department into the district attorney's office and implicating multiple elected officials in this city. The gallery exploded, gasps overlapped with exclamations, and in the far corner, a man actually stood and pointed toward the officers before the bailiff barked at him to sit down. The judge's gavel came down twice, hard echoing against the wood. Order. This court will have order. Jordan's gaze was locked on the three officers. Harlan didn't look back at her. His smirk was gone, replaced with a rigid mask, the face of a man holding himself together by force of will. Mendez's jaw was tight but his eyes were darting, calculating. Boyd's stare had gone glassy, as if he'd retreated inward to some place where this wasn't happening. The city attorney took a step toward the bench, his voice low and urgent. Your Honor, I would caution you. You will sit down, the judge cut in without lifting his eyes, his voice like cold steel. There was no room in it for negotiation. Then, unexpectedly, his gaze shifted to Jordan.
Ms. Jordan, do you wish to respond before the court determines its next step?
She rose slowly, planting her palms on the table for a moment, before she stood straight. No response, Your Honor. Not yet. The calmness in her tone might have sounded deferential to the casual ear, but it was anything but. This wasn't retreat, it was restraint. The control in her voice was sharper than accusation, more dangerous than outrage. The judge studied her for a beat, then nodded once. He slid the papers back into the envelope, sealing them with a firm hand, and addressed the room. This court will recess for 1 hour, he said, striking the gavel in a single decisive blow, during which time this matter will be reviewed in chambers. The noise came back instantly, a swelling tide of whispers and speculation. The gallery surged toward the doors, reporters fumbling for their phones, Harlan leaning in toward his attorney with a hissed comment. Jordan didn't move. She stayed seated as the bailiff approached the bench, as the prosecutors gathered their papers in tight, jerky motions. She had no intention of leaving the building. The hour ahead wasn't an interruption in her plan. It was her window. The courtroom emptied in waves, the noise trailing off down the marble corridors. From her seat, Jordan could hear the soft thud of the heavy doors closing, the echoes settling into silence. The bailiff approached her quietly. Ms. Jordan, the judge would like to see you. Now. She stood, collecting her folder with the same care she'd shown all day. Her heels clicked in a slow, steady rhythm as she followed him through a side door that bypassed the main hall. The narrow passage smelled faintly of old paper and varnished wood, the scent of secrets kept for decades. They arrived at the judge's chambers. It was a large room, but the heavy shelves, thick curtains, and dim lighting made it feel smaller, more intimate. The air here was still, as if it had been waiting for this conversation long before they entered. The judge sat behind his desk, the envelope now resting in front of him. His glasses lay folded beside it, which meant he wanted to see her without any filter between them. 2 men in dark suits stood near the wall, the same agents who had walked into the courtroom that morning. Their expressions were unreadable, but their eyes tracked her with an intensity that told her this wasn't a casual meeting. Sit down, Miss Jordan, the judge said. His voice had changed, less judicial formality, more quiet weight. She sat, placing the folder on her lap, but keeping one hand on it. The judge didn't waste time. I've reviewed enough of this, he said, tapping the envelope, to know it's bigger than a municipal trial, and I've been in this chair long enough to recognize when I'm looking at the tip of a much deeper rock. One of the agents stepped forward. That's why we're here. The judge glanced at them. You can explain. The taller of the 2 agents, a man with close-cropped hair and a voice like gravel, spoke. We've been tracking a network of coordinated misconduct in several departments across the state. Your arrest, Miss Jordan, gave us probable cause to connect this precinct to a broader operation. Jordan listened without breaking eye contact. And now? The agent didn't blink. Now we take it federal. The judge leaned back in his chair. That's going to make some very powerful people nervous, including in this city's government, which is why, he paused, glancing between her and the agents. I'm considering closing this trial today, publicly. The last thing we need is someone tipping off the wrong ears before you're ready. She tilted her head slightly. Closing the trial makes it look like they've won. The second agent, younger but with a voice carrying equal authority, stepped in. Unless, he said, we pivot the narrative. Make them think you've been shut down while you're actually taking the lead on the next phase. Jordan's fingers brushed the edge of her folder. Lead? The first agent nodded. We don't just want you as a witness. We want you in the field. You have something none of our current people do. You've been in their crosshairs and you didn't flinch. You understand their arrogance, because you've been on the receiving end of it. The judge watched her closely, as if gauging her reaction. For a moment, Jordan didn't answer. She looked at the envelope on his desk, then at the agents. I didn't go through all this, she said finally. Just to hand it over and hope you don't lose it in the system like they've been doing for years. The younger agent's lips twitched, the closest he came to a smile. That's exactly why we want you. You're not afraid to hold it yourself. The judge cleared his throat. If you agree, we'll adjourn the case on paper but continue the work off record. Everything you've gathered will be secured under federal seal. But you'll have access, full access. Jordan's gaze was steady. You understand what happens when they find out. They already made you a target, the first agent said flatly. The difference now is, you won't be standing alone. There was a pause, a long one, the kind where the air feels thicker than it should, as though the decision being made will alter the course of more than just one life. Finally, Jordan leaned back in her chair, a slow exhale, leaving her lungs. Fine. But we do this my way. I pick the first target. The agents exchanged a glance. The judge's eyes narrowed, but he didn't object. The older agent stepped forward, reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. When his hand emerged, it wasn't with more papers, but with something small and gleaming. A badge. Not the temporary, laminated kind. This one was weighty, polished, the letters etched deep enough to last a lifetime. Below the seal, her name was already engraved. Special Agent Jordan Hayes. Her eyes lingered on it for a moment before taking it in her hand. The cool metal pressed into her palm, heavier than she expected. It wasn't just a badge. It was permission. It was responsibility. And it was a weapon of a different kind. The agent's voice was low, meant only for her. Welcome back. Jordan closed her fingers around the badge, the faintest curve of a smile pulling at her lips. The judge tapped the envelope once, decisively. Then it settled. The trial ends today, but the real work begins now. Outside, the noise of the crowd was building again. The restless hum of a city that didn't yet know the ground under it was about to shift. Jordan stood, the badge still in her hand, her mind already moving ahead to names, patterns, and pressure points. She didn't notice the younger agent watching her with an expression that was almost wary. As they turned toward the door, he stepped close enough for only her to hear. They don't know who you are yet, he murmured. But when they do, they're going to realize you're not just here to investigate them. Jordan looked at him, the corner of her mouth lifting. No, she said softly. I'm here to dismantle them. And with that, the first agent held the door open. The light from the hallway cut across the dimness of the chamber, catching the badge in her hand. It gleamed once, just before she slipped it into her jacket. As she stepped into the hall, the older agent's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. We have a problem, he said. One of the names in that envelope just vanished. The words "one of the names just vanished" followed Jordan down the hallway like an echo that refused to fade. She didn't ask who, not yet. There would be time for that. But the window they had now to act on the others was narrow. The courthouse corridors were no longer calm. The noise outside had swelled into something alive. Reporters calling questions, camera shutters snapping, the rumble of voices vibrating through the walls. The moment she stepped back into the courtroom, she saw them. Harland, Mendez, Boyd, still in uniform, still sitting at their table but without the easy swagger they'd carried earlier. Harland's eyes darted toward her, then away. Mendez kept his jaw locked, his gaze fixed on the floor. Boyd's fingers tapped restlessly on his knee, the rhythm fast, uneven. The judge re-entered a moment later, his expression carved into something colder than it had been all morning. This court, he said, his voice filling the room, has determined that due to the evidence submitted and the extraordinary nature of the allegations, all charges against Jordan Hayes are hereby dismissed with prejudice. The gallery erupted, some in cheers, others in stunned murmurs. Harlan's head snapped toward the judge, his mouth opening to speak before his attorney placed a hand on his arm. The gavel fell once, twice, and then the doors opened. It was like watching a change in the weather. The sudden shift in air pressure before a storm breaks. 3 federal agents stepped in, followed by 2 uniformed marshals. Their eyes swept the room, their movements precise, their presence radiating the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. The lead marshal stepped forward. Officers Harland, Mendez, Boyd, stand up. There was a pause, a long one. Then Harland laughed. A short, bitter sound. You can't be serious. The marshal's voice didn't change. Now, Harland pushed his chair back so hard, it scraped against the floor. He stood slowly, squaring his shoulders like a man preparing for a fight he thought he could still win. What's the charge? He demanded. The agent nearest to Jordan spoke this time, his tone as sharp as a paper cut. Conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, falsification of official documents, tampering with evidence. And that's just the beginning. The reaction was immediate. Mendez's face drained of color. Boyd muttered a curse under his breath. Harland tried to smirk again, but it faltered halfway, leaving something that looked more like a grimace. The marshals moved in, cuffing them one by one, the sound of the metal closing around their wrists, loud in the tense quiet. It was the same sound Jordan remembered from that night on the street. Only this time, it wasn't her wrists. From the gallery, someone began clapping. One person at first, then another, until it swelled into a wave of applause. Reporters at the back scribbled furiously, cameras flashing with each step the officers took toward the door. Outside, the cheers were louder, raw, unrestrained, spilling into the street. People lined the courthouse steps, cell phones raised, documenting every second. Jordan could hear them chanting her name, though she didn't let it change her expression. She followed at a distance as the marshals led the three men out. For the first time all day, she saw Harland's confidence break entirely, just for a flicker, when the sunlight hit his face, and the crowd roared. He squinted against the brightness, but it wasn't the light that made him flinch. It was the sound. It was the sound of being on the wrong side of the glass. The cameras zoomed in as the officers were loaded into separate black SUVs. Jordan stopped at the top of the steps, the badge still in her jacket, the weight of it steady against her ribs. People surged toward the base of the stairs, shouting questions, snapping pictures. She didn't answer any of them. She just stood there, letting them look, letting them see the difference between the woman they'd watched stand trial that morning and the one standing here now. Somewhere to her left, a reporter shouted, "Miss Hayes, what happens next?" She didn't turn her head. She just said loud enough to carry, "Next, we go further." The crowd's cheer spiked again, but in the midst of it, another sound cut through. A voice, low at first, almost swallowed by the noise, but growing clearer as it came closer. "Jordan." She turned her head slightly, scanning the edge of the crowd. Jordan Hayes. This time it was sharper. Not a stranger's call, but the kind of voice that knew her. Not just her name, but her history. A man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, his face half hidden by the shadow of a baseball cap. Even before he lifted his head, she knew. It had been years. Years since she'd seen him. Years since the night she'd stood in a different streetlight's glow, watching a different set of officers put him in cuffs. Her breath caught, but her face didn't change. Not here. Not now. The man stopped at the foot of the courthouse steps, looking up at her with an expression she couldn't read. Part relief, part warning, part something else entirely. "Been a long time," he said. The crowd surged again, pressing closer, the moment almost swallowed by the noise. But not for her, because she remembered the last thing he'd said to her before they took him away. "One day, you're gonna see the whole thing for what it is. And when you do, you'll have to choose which side you're on." Now here he was, standing in front of her. And in his eyes she could see it. The unspoken truth that whatever came next was going to make today look simple. He tilted his head toward the line of black SUVs pulling away, and said, "You think you've got them all? You haven't even scratched the surface." The man in the baseball cap didn't move at first. He just stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, watching her the way someone might watch a fuse burn toward a charge they'd placed years ago. Jordan didn't go to him. Not yet. She stayed where she was, letting the crowd thin, letting the noise of the cheering and the SUVs fade into something more distant. When there were only a few reporters left at the base of the stairs, she began to walk down toward him. Each step was measured, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted to see if he'd hold his ground. He did. "Jordan Hayes," he said again when she was close enough to hear him over the low hum of the crowd. "Didn't think I'd see you here. Not like this." "Same," she replied. Her voice was even, but her eyes didn't leave his. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" He tipped the brim of his cap back slightly, enough for her to see more of his face. Time had carved lines into it, but the eyes were the same, sharp, restless, carrying too much history. Came to see the show, he said. Then, softer, and to remind you the curtain's not all the way up yet. Her jaw tightened. That's supposed to mean something? It means, he said, stepping closer. You're taking down pieces of a wall, but you haven't found the man who built it yet. Before she could answer, a commotion erupted to their left. The marshals were bringing Harland, Mendez, and Boyd back out, this time in a tighter security detail. They'd been processed inside, and now they were being loaded into transport for holding. The crowd's reaction was immediate. A fresh wave of cheers, camera flashes, and shouted questions. Jordan's gaze snapped to Harland. Even cuffed, he tried to carry himself like a man who still had some control. But she saw it, the flicker in his eyes, when he spotted her. That flicker wasn't just from today's humiliation. It was recognition. A different kind of recognition. In that moment, the years folded in on themselves, and she was no longer standing on courthouse steps. She was 17 again, standing outside a different building, a police station that smelled of stale coffee and wet uniforms, while her mother sat inside, face in her hands, because her son had been arrested. Her brother Aaron, 23, arrested for armed robbery. He didn't commit. She'd been too young to understand all the legal language, but old enough to remember the way the arresting officer smirked when Aaron was brought out in cuffs. Old enough to hear her mother whisper the name of that officer under her breath, like a curse she would carry forever. Harland. That case had swallowed Aaron's life. The evidence against him had been neat, precise, too neat. And years later, after his death in prison, Jordan had seen the file again and spotted the holes, the discrepancies, the impossible timelines. She had spent nights staring at those reports, knowing in her bones that someone had built the case to destroy him. And now the man who had walked Aaron into a cell was standing in cuffs himself. Her chest tightened, but not from satisfaction. It was something heavier, sharper. Because revenge wasn't as clean as people imagined. It didn't erase the years. It didn't bring back the dead. She stepped down from the last stair, closing the distance until she stood just to the side of Harland's path. He looked at her then, really looked at her. And she saw it, the moment the pieces clicked for him. You, he said quietly, almost like an accusation. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The marshal nudged him forward, but Harland leaned toward her as they passed, his voice low enough for only her to hear. You think this is about me? His lips barely moved. You think you've pulled the thread? Her eyes narrowed. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Aaron wasn't mine alone.
The words landed like a blow.
Not because of the name. She'd carried that name like armor for years, but because of what it meant. If Harland hadn't acted alone in framing her brother, then the web was bigger. And whoever else had been part of it was still out there. For the first time all day, Jordan felt the ground shift under her feet. The satisfaction she'd expected to feel seeing Harland, led away, dissolved into something else. A colder determination, because this wasn't over. And now, she wasn't just dismantling a system. She was hunting ghosts. As Harland was pushed toward the waiting vehicle, he turned his head just enough to murmur one last thing over his shoulder. Check the files you haven't been given. Jordan's face changed instantly, not from anger, but from the realization that he was right. Some of the evidence she needed was still locked away. Harland was almost at the transport vehicle when Jordan made her decision. She didn't call out to him. That would have been too public, too performative. Instead, she stepped off the curb and closed the distance herself. The marshals moved to block her, but she lifted her badge just enough for them to see. She has 2 minutes, the older agent said quietly from behind her. The marshals hesitated, then stepped aside. Harland stood with one foot in the van, the other on the asphalt. His wrists were cuffed in front of him now, but his posture was still the same. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, as if defiance could shield him from gravity. Jordan stopped just close enough that the space between them felt sharp. You're going to explain that, she said. Her tone was calm, but the weight in it made the air seem smaller. He gave a humorless half smile. Explain what? You said Aaron wasn't yours alone. Harland's eyes shifted, not evasive, but testing. You want the truth? You won't like it. She didn't blink. Try me. He exhaled slowly, almost like he was savoring the moment. They wanted him gone before he got the chance to talk. He had a file, one that connected half the department to side jobs. Kickbacks, protection deals for people you'd never expect. He wasn't innocent in the eyes of the people pulling the strings. He was a threat. Her stomach tightened. And by people, you mean? Harlan shook his head. Not just the city. State task force. Couple of feds in on it too. The kind who don't wear badges in public. Your brother stumbled into a network that stretches a lot farther than this courthouse. She studied him for any sign he was lying. But the tone in his voice wasn't the smug manipulation she'd come to expect. This was different. This was the voice of someone too far gone to care about consequences. He didn't die from prison violence, Harland added. That's the story they wrote for you. Truth is, someone made sure he didn't make it to trial. Easier to close the case if the witness disappears. The noise of the crowd outside the courthouse blurred in her ears. It wasn't shock that hit her first. It was confirmation. The gnawing suspicion she'd carried for years now had teeth. Her brother hadn't just been failed by the system. He'd been erased by it. And if Harland was telling the truth about the scope of this network, then every file she'd touched in her investigation so far was just surface detail. Why tell me now? She asked. Harland's jaw tightened. Because you're not going to stop. And maybe you'll take them down before they take you. But make no mistake, Hayes, they will try. The marshal at the van door cleared his throat. Time's up. Harlan stepped inside, then turned back one last time. Check the sealed archives in the state building, he said. Room 44. If it's still there, you'll see the list. The door shut, sealing him inside. The van pulled away, disappearing into the tangle of side streets. Jordan stood on the asphalt for a long moment, the badge heavy in her jacket, the noise of the crowd rushing back into focus. The older agent stepped beside her. You believe him? I believe he knows enough to scare them, she said, and that's enough for me to check. As they moved back toward the courthouse steps, the reporters closed in again, microphones and cameras thrust forward like spears. Miss Hayes, what's next? One shouted. Do you think today's arrests will lead to more? Another asked. Is it true the FBI is now officially involved? Jordan didn't answer immediately. Her eyes swept the crowd, catching the small red recording light on a camera near the front. She stepped toward it, closing the distance until her face filled the frame. The murmurs around her quieted just enough for her voice to carry. This, she said, her tone steady, is not the end. This is just the beginning. Her gaze didn't break from the lens, even as flashes popped in her peripheral vision. She wanted whoever was on the other side of that screen, whether a frightened whistleblower or someone sitting comfortably behind a desk in another city, to know she meant it. The younger agent leaned in toward her shoulder and murmured, You just painted a target on yourself twice the size. Without looking at him, she replied, Good. Makes me easier to find. Saves me the trouble of knocking. Behind the crowd, unnoticed by most, a man in a dark coat lowered a small handheld camera and walked away, vanishing into the sea of people. Jordan didn't see him, but in his pocket, he carried a memory card labeled. The rain hadn't let up all morning. It slicked the streets of D.C. in silver and shadow, blurring the city into reflections that shifted with every passing car. Jordan stood at the curb, coat collar turned up, the badge in her jacket pressing against her side like a heartbeat. Today was the day the titles changed. When she stepped into the lobby of the FBI's J. Edgar Hoover building, the weight of the moment didn't come from the size of the space or the marble underfoot. It came from the way every head in the room turned toward her. Some were curious, some skeptical. A few, openly resentful. She knew why. She wasn't the kind of director the Bureau usually crowned. She hadn't climbed the ladder in a spotless linear ascent. She'd been a defendant in a public trial weeks ago, accused by the very kind of people she was now here to dismantle. And that made her dangerous. The swearing-in ceremony was small, by design. The Attorney General stood at her side, reading the oath in a steady voice. Cameras clicked quietly in the back. A handful of senior agents watched from the rows of seats, their faces carefully neutral. Jordan repeated the words without falter, each one landing like a mark on a map she'd been charting for years. When it was done, the AG shook her hand, leaned in, and whispered so only she could hear. They'll fight you. Every inch. Jordan allowed the smallest of smiles. Good. Means I'm in the right place. After the ceremony, she walked the length of the hallway toward the director's office. The portraits lining the walls stared down at her. Rows of men, their eyes caught forever in frames of polished wood and dusted glass. She wondered how many of them had truly understood the depth of the machinery they'd been steering. Inside, the office smelled faintly of leather and paper. The desk was cleared, the phone in its exact center, the city sprawling in gray light beyond the window. She didn't sit right away. She stood there looking out, the reflection of her own face faint in the glass. The older agent from the courthouse stepped in, closing the door behind him. "First order of business," he said, handing her a slim folder. "We're reclassifying your brother's case as part of an ongoing federal investigation. That means no one can touch it without your clearance." She took the folder, feeling the weight of it, and the list from room 4. His expression tightened. "We've secured part of it, but some files were already pulled. We're working on tracking who took them." Jordan opened the folder just enough to see Aaron's name on the first page. It wasn't closure, it was fuel. She closed it and set it on the desk. "This isn't going to stop with his case," she said. "We're going after every department running the same playbook. Every one of them." The agent nodded once. "We're with you, but you know this is going to get messy." "Messy's fine," she replied. "Silence isn't." Her first act as director wasn't ceremonial. It was a call not to politicians or press, but to a handful of people scattered across the country. Former colleagues, investigative journalists, civil rights attorneys, the kind of people who didn't wait for permission to do the right thing. By the time the call ended, a new task force had been born. Not one built on optics, but on reach, into places where cameras didn't go, and records were kept in locked drawers. 2 days later, she stood in a conference room. A map of the U.S. stretched across a wall. Pinned dots marked departments under quiet review. 3 had already been confirmed for federal takeover. As she walked past the table, her hand brushed the corner of a file marked confidential in red. Inside was a memo outlining patterns of racial targeting, identical to the ones she'd fought in her own case. Different state, different uniforms, same machinery. Her team waited for her signal. Jordan stood at the head of the table, looking from face to face. "This is where we start," she said. "Not where we stop. If you're here to dismantle something that's been designed to protect itself. It will push back. It will smear you. It will try to outlast you." She let the silence stretch for a moment, the rain tapping faintly at the windows. "But we are going to make it impossible for them to breathe without knowing someone is watching." By the time she returned to her office, the storm outside had eased, but the city still dripped in its aftermath. She stood at the window again, the file in her hand, the hum of the building around her. Somewhere far below, people crossed the streets without knowing how close they were to being names on a list. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't a call, it was a push notification. She glanced at the screen. "Breaking news. Federal probe opens into East Ridge Police Department, following allegations of systemic misconduct." The photo beneath it showed a building she recognized. Not because she'd ever worked there, but because she'd already seen the first set of names connected to it. She looked at the headline a moment longer, then set the phone down, her reflection catching in the black glass of the screen. This was the rhythm now. Not defense. Not survival. Hunting. She picked up the phone, dialed a number from memory, and waited for the line to click. When it did, she said only 3 words. "I'll take East Ridge." If stories like this make your chest tighten, it's because they're still happening in different streets, to different names. Every voice matters in making sure they're not forgotten. Type yes if you believe in justice, and subscribe if you know this fight is far from over.